world is increasingly dark and it's affecting our young people. But as parents, do our young people see something different about our lives? What are we living for?
As parents, we need to equip the next generation to know the truth of God's Word. But more than that, we need to live it out. Our goal is not to raise children that achieve the American dream. No, we have an eternal focus. Our lives are about God and saying yes to the adventure He has for each one of us.
We need to pass the banner on to the next generation so that they can carry the light of Jesus to every dark corner of the world.
This is Chosen Jen, and you're listening to the Discipleship Parenting Podcast.
Hi everyone, we're Katie and Justin. We're your podcast hosts. We are a husband and wife team, parents of 6, and we are excited to be diving into God's Word with you today. I'm sorry we missed the podcast last week. We actually have had a bout of pretty nasty sickness going through our family, and with 8 of us all together, it always seems to take a while for things to run its course. So we are finally coming out of that. So I apologize, though, if our voices are a little raspy today. It is good, however, to be back with you guys and diving into today's topic.
So one of the things that's in the news right now is Russia and Ukraine. Russia has been amassing its military on the border of Ukraine for months now. And the question is, what is Russia's plans? Are they going to invade Ukraine? And what's going to be the consequences if they take that step? And I think most of the anxiety for people comes with the realization that these situations between two nations doesn't necessarily mean it's going to stay with those two countries, because people support Ukraine. So if Russia goes into Ukraine, how many nations will back and support Ukraine against Russia? And how many nations will be on Russia's side? We've seen this in history, how whole worlds can come together in a war over something seemingly small in the beginning. And I think that's where, when people see this potential conflict, there's a lot of fears and worries about what is going to happen.
Yeah, and I would be lying if I said I don't have those same thoughts. You know, you see these tensions in the world. You see some of the people who lead some of the rogue countries that could potentially cause a ton of trouble. And man, as a mom, you go, oh, this is intimidating. And so I think it's really important that we as Christians, as families, we need to talk about this. How do we handle this kind of stuff? And what does God's Word have to say to us that not only gives us comfort, but also courage to keep going forward boldly, doing God's work in the world?
So I'm going to jump in by reading from Matthew chapter 24, verses 6 to 8. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of birth pains. So those are words of Jesus talking about signs that the end is coming. And we know, since Jesus has left, that we are in the end times. We don't know how much in the end times that we are in, but we are definitely awaiting His second return. And so these words are true, that there are wars and rumors of wars and nations rising against one another. I think it's clear that we already see famines and earthquakes in various places. So all the birth pains that Jesus talks about are happening. And the reason I wanted to start with this passage wasn't just to point out that, hey, these things are happening, but to make the first point of comfort that we can gain from God's Word, and that's the fact that God knows what's going to happen. Jesus here speaks of the future that we're living through, and He knew exactly what was to come. And when we read the entire Bible, we see over and over how God knows all the details of all of history. He knows exactly what plans and purposes He's carrying out. His will is being done. And for us as Christians, that should bring us a ton of comfort.
I want to read to you from Acts chapter 17. I'm going to read verses 24 through 26. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples built by human hands. And he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. From one man he made all the nations that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. I think this is such an interesting passage because we find out that not only does God determine when in history these kings and rulers and obviously even us are going to be, but also the boundaries of their lands, how far they can go and how far they can't go. I mean, this is all completely in the hand of God. And as the kids and we homeschool, continue to study world history. I love being able to keep doing it over and over again with the kids because you pick up so much every single time and you just see how a nation will rise and it seems like they're going to conquer the world forever and then they don't and then they decrease and then God brings another kingdom and then they rise and they're top man for a while and then nope, God brings something else. And you really see how he does have this complete control, this ability to raise up kingdoms and to bring kingdoms down.
When I hear about God raising up nations and bringing other nations down and allotting boundaries to lands, it makes me think of the Israelites, how they come out of Egypt and enter into the promised land. And we see how God really blesses the fighting that the Israelites do. And they win battle after battle against the different peoples that are possessing the promised land so that they can take it over. It was God's will for the Israelites to have that land. He had made that promise way back to Abraham. And then his will is fulfilled, and the Israelites, all these years later, are able to successfully come in and conquer that land. And we see years later just the opposite when the Israelites and then the people of Judah rebel against God and worship false gods and live in the ways of the people who they had defeated, who used to possess the land. When they do those things, that God quickly brings these foreign nations to come and bring them out of the promised land into exile. He allows them to be defeated. And so we see this through the story of the Israelites very clearly, how God determines their rise and their fall, and his will is the one that is done.
I'm going to read to you a section from Isaiah chapter 7. I'm going to read verses 1 through 9. Stick with me. It's a little bit longer. But again, we see here God's sovereignty, God's power, his control, and I love how this whole section ends. So, when Ahaz, son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, was king of Judah, King Rezin of Aram, and Pekah, son of Remaliah, king of Israel, marched up to fight against Jerusalem, but they could not overpower it. Now the house of David was told, Aram has allied itself with Ephraim. So the hearts of Ahaz and his people were shaken as the trees of the forest are shaken by the wind. Then the Lord said to Isaiah, Go out, you and your son, Shear-Jashub, to meet Ahaz at the end of the aqueduct of the upper pool on the road to the launderer's field. Say to him, Be careful, keep calm, and do not be afraid. Do not lose heart because of these two smoldering stubs of firewood, because of the fierce anger of Rezin and Aram and the son of Remaliah. Aram and Ephraim and Remaliah's son have plotted your ruin, saying, Let us invade Judah. Let us tear it apart and divide it among ourselves, and make the son of Tabeel king over it. Yet this is what the sovereign Lord says. It will not take place. It will not happen. For the head of Aram is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is only Rezin. Within 65 years, Ephraim will be too shattered to be a people. The head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is only Remaliah's son. If you do not stand firm in your faith, you will not stand at all. So we see these kings rising up. They're saying, guess what, King of Judah, we're coming, we're taking your land, we're going to put this guy as king over it. And the king of Judah and his people, they're shaking like trees of the forest shaken by the wind. They're freaking out. And then Isaiah gets sent to him. And what does God say? It's not happening. I'm not going to let it happen. Who are these men? They're just men. I'm telling you, it's not going to happen. And if you don't stand firm in your faith, you will not stand at all. And really, isn't that the message for us? If we don't stand firm in the faith, what do we stand on?
As Christians, it's easy to go through our daily lives and say that we believe in God and that we trust in the Bible and its promises and truths. And yet, what uncertainties and trials and hardships do is that it almost says, prove it. Prove that you believe that God is who he says he is and that his words are what you're going to build your life on, that they're going to be the foundation and you're going to stand upon them. And it really reveals if it's the case or not, because a lot of us, we will say that, but in the moment of hardships, we might look to other things for our safety and comfort and security, things that we can see and grasp. And it just shows that our faith really wasn't making us stand. Our trust in God has failed. And so it's something for us to evaluate, something that we should stop and ask ourselves, do I really believe what I say I believe? In a time of great distress, am I going to stand strong in my faith? And why am I so confident that that's what I will do?
Yeah, we used to use this example with our teenagers when we worked in youth ministry, and we said, we've all heard of a bulletproof vest, that these can withstand a bullet from this range at this speed and this caliber bullet, whatever. You can hear and you can believe that. We can all believe that bulletproof vests work. But it's a whole different ball game when you say, hey, give me a bulletproof vest, and you back away from the shooter and you let someone take a shot at you. That's a whole different ball game. That's real faith in that bulletproof vest. And that's really kind of what we're talking about. I think trials of life force you to walk out with the bulletproof vest on and go, all right, world, go ahead. I'm wearing every single promise of God, and I know that they will not fail me.
So one of the biblical characters we can look up to is Daniel, because he faced that challenge to compromise on God's word, to not stand strong in a moment where things were very chaotic. He was not supposed to pray to anyone but the king. And yet, what did he do? He continued to pray as he always had done. And we see that this wasn't the first time he had been faithful to following God. His whole life story was moment by moment choosing to do what God said versus following what man was telling him to do. His heart was devoted to God, and that constant practice of obedience is what makes Daniel such an incredible person to look up to, because we see how God really blessed his faithfulness to him and really protected him and took care of him. And for us as Christians, that's exactly what we're called to do. We're called to faithfully and obediently follow God and trust him to be our protector, our refuge, our strength. And that's where we can stand strong.
Yeah, what a great point. Daniel really is a good example of someone who clings to God at all costs when his whole world was really turned upside down in a huge clash, a conflict of kingdoms. But there's one thing I want to make sure we're very clear about. We can stand confidently in a crazy world, in the face of wars and rumors of wars, on God's promises, because they won't fail. But we have to make sure that we aren't trying to stand on something that God hasn't promised. And God has not promised an easy life. He hasn't promised tons of physical blessings. He hasn't promised that we'll always have, the comforts and the ease of the life we have in America. He's never promised those things. And so we have to be careful that as Christians, we don't build up those things as that's God's blessing and that's ours and he's promised that we get that. No, that's not promised. Jesus actually tells us in this world, you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. Those are the things we can cling to.
The reality of wars is that there's so much that we can lose. We can lose safety and security. We can lose possessions and people we love. We can lose our normal way of life. War can take so much from us. And yet that reality is such a good reminder for us not to build our lives living for the here and now, things that are so temporary that we really have no control over. It's like grasping the wind. You just can't hold on to it. But let's instead focus our hearts on what is eternal. Let's love God with all of our heart and to seek Him each day in His Word.
Yeah, and with that eternal mindset, with that heavenly goal, with our focus on God, let's be doing the work He's called us to do. It said He's appointed when each of us should live. He has appointed you for this time, so that you could do the good works which He prepared in advance for you to do. We're here to spread the good news of Jesus, to be living for God's kingdom, because the Bible tells us that there is only one king, and His name is Jesus, and He reigns already. And one day soon He's coming back, and there are so many people who aren't ready. And while the times might get tumultuous, every single thing that God walks us through can provide new opportunities for us to share the good news of Christ with a lost and dying world that desperately needs it.
Thank you for joining us for this week's podcast episode. Please be sure to like, share, leave us a review. Also, please swing by our ministry's website, chosengenministry.org, to check out the resources that are there for you as parents to help you pass on your faith to your kids. Katie and I thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to being with you next time. Take care.